William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Monica Hartman. I'm the director of the Office of Homeless Solutions. It's a pleasure to have you guys joining us this evening. We're very excited to be able to spend a little bit of time with you. We don't take for granted the opportunity to do some community engagement and to hear the voice of our citizens and concerned public servants, as well as community members and advocates for the homeless. So the purpose of this meeting, I always mention it, it's not for us to stand up here and to give you a presentation. Yes, we have a little bit of information that we're going to share with you tonight, but really what we want to have is really some rich conversation and receive some feedback from you. So please don't hesitate to speak up. I will be Vanna White this evening, so I'll have the mic and I'll be going around. But before I do so, I wanted to be able to introduce the two wonderful presenters for you guys tonight. Ms. Charletta Sharp, she is my program administrator for the Office of Homeless Solutions. She is my subject matter expert, amazing woman, a lot of knowledge and expertise. So she's here to be able to walk through the presentation and answer some questions. I also have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Chris Kulak, who is the chair of our Housing Subcommittee for the Citizen Homelessness Commission. So it's a pleasure to introduce them this evening, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and answering your questions.
So we're going to, like Monica said, we're just going to run through a short presentation. Again, really this is for you to come and ask questions about the RFP that will come out related to the bond that was passed a few years ago. So very quickly, I mean, we've done the welcome part. We'll kind of run through the purpose of the form as we did. Overview, kind of the bond statement, so everybody has kind of a basis and understanding about what we are here to kind of talk about. The Citizens Homelessness Commission feedback, we'll sort of talk a little bit about that, and then it's going to be open up to you as an audience to ask questions, comments. There'll be kind of a survey. We'll pass out some questionnaires to get your feedback on some specific things related to what we're presenting, but really it's about you guys giving us your opinions and thoughts and really asking questions prior to the city releasing the bond. We'll be releasing the RFP later in March. All right? I'll turn it over to Charlotte.
Good evening again, everyone, and thank you for being here. So we want to start off by just familiarizing you with the proposition that voters approved back in November of 2017, just what the bond could be used for, and then we'll go into more detail about priorities and some of the funding principles. And so as you can see here on the slide, the proposition states that the funding is for permanent supportive housing targeting chronic homeless, rapid rehousing addressing the elderly, disabled, families with children, and young adults, as well as being used for day centers for seamless wraparound services. And so what we are looking for will include not only new construction, but the opportunity for rehab, so rehabilitation of units or adaptive reuse. So if you're wanting to convert an existing facility that isn't residential to a residential use, there will also be opportunity to do so with these funds. We know that $20 million will not solve our problem, and so leverage, this is really to leverage existing resources and be able to gap finance, based on what your performance is and just doing that underwriting analysis. It's important to recognize that this funding is capital funding only, and so supportive services are required for the projects for housing units. However, the operating dollars would not come from the bond funds. We do have some funding that will be able to help support that, and we can talk about that towards the end. But either you would have to bring that through a partnering organization, through your current organization, and again, we have funds that can help subsidize as well. Because these are bond funds, and we really want to ensure that the intent of the dollars that it continues to be used for persons experiencing homelessness and housing them, then we would have a restrictive covenant that's tied to the project. And so you foresee that being somewhere up to 20 years, just to be able to make sure that we don't have a project that, is for the homeless for 2 years and then, it ends up converting for another use. So we would make sure that there's a restriction, which is maybe a deed restriction or some other instrument that will secure the use for the homeless. We have to, we will make sure that we're procuring these funds through a competitive process, right? And so many of you are familiar with the term of NOFA, or the Notice of Funding Availability. We will make sure that we will put the funds out, describe what our priorities are, what the funding principles are, what the allowable uses are, and then have a competitive process in which we will have a committee that evaluates and qualifies those who are submitting proposals and making sure that it aligns with the city's purposes.
So just to kind of go through some of the criteria, we've been looking at NOFAs from some other cities, kind of determine sort of best practices on how to tackle this. And as Charlotte pointed out, $20 million is going to solve all of our problems, but it's a great help to a lot of groups that are starting or wanting to do a project like this. Kind of the target population, I think is pretty self-explanatory: seniors, families with children, persons with disabilities, veterans, and then young adults. Site selection criteria for supported housing tool will be used. So the comprehensive housing policy is something that certainly would be part of this process, and certainly as the person's coming forward and wanting to apply for these dollars, certainly using the things that are laid out in that, and then certainly the market value analysis is preferred. It doesn't have to be in those areas, but that's something that the city, along with its comprehensive housing policy and some of the direction that we want to go, really looking at those market value analysis is certainly something that's preferred. Looking at development in those core areas, using the MBA to promote developments in the RSA areas as well. This is certainly something that this will look at. And then subsidized housing in neighborhoods throughout the city. Some of the funding priorities, this is suitable for qualified rapid rehousing individuals and families. Just one, based on feasibility and consistency in the proposed development schedule, the project will meet some of the city's annual production goals as well. Located in one of the city's reinvestment strategies areas. We had a question at the last meeting when someone asked, does it have to be into that? It does not. It is sort of a nod, but if it is, then you get an extra nod there. Mixed income, serving a range of incomes from 0 to 120 AMI. The bond funds specifically were 0 to 30. Mixed use certainly is something that I think a lot of groups will come forward with. Location near, obviously, amenities, parks, and grocery stores, and libraries, and things of that nature are also going to be important. One of the things that certainly is something that we would certainly consider a priority is, is this being developed and managed by individuals or entities that have had sort of experience in doing this type of work? It's something that I think is certainly would be important to see that this becomes to be successful. This is a group that's done this type of work before applying for these funds. Do they have sort of track record of doing that work? Sustainable design, I think it goes back to something that's going to be there for 20 years, providing that service to the homeless. You want to make sure it's designed in a way that's going to last. Community engagement, that's going to be key, I think, to this project, to any of these projects that come forward, because you're going to want to have sort of engagement from that community. I'm guessing everybody here that's done this type of work understands how important it is to have kind of community feedback and community engagement. Collaborative partnerships, appropriate leverage the city's funding. Again, this is not going to come, the groups are going to come to us and all the funding is going to come from the bond. It has to be sort of a private partnership between that organization, maybe some of their funds, maybe some private funds, as well as the cities. The Homelessness Commission has really looked at this, and we talked about this in both our housing subcommittee and as a full commission. And our sort of recommendations and our sort of feedback that we've received is that really we'd like for this funding to be targeted for rapid rehousing and transitional housing, because of course most of the federal dollars are of course permanent support. And so looking at this as more of an opportunity to help expand some of the rapid rehousing. It's not a requirement per se, but it is something that we would like to see done. And that preference that the projects remain affordable. Again, as Charlotte mentioned, you don't want a project to come online and for 2 years it's great for the homeless, and then for 18 more years later it's not. And then the encouraging of, again, of groups that have done this type of work before, encouraging those nonprofits that have a sort of history and track record of working in this space and having some good outcomes also be important.
And so you'll notice that for our next steps, of course, it included seeking feedback from the community, or being able to outreach more to you all. And so we had the meeting last week, an in-person meeting last week. Before that, we actually had the virtual meeting that some of you may have joined in. And then today's meeting, we're working with a consultant, Cloudburst, who's helping us, look at, all of the components very closely to make sure that we have an instrument that will really be appealing for new developers and for partnerships to be developed and respond to the proposal, while also aligning with the recommended priorities from the Citizen Homelessness Commission and the priorities from the city, from existing city policy. And so that interdepartmental team that exists is really making sure that our I's are dotted, our T's are crossed, and so that we're giving feedback so that once the NOFA hits the streets, that it's easy to follow. It's not too complicated. Of course, we'll have to ask for enough information that shows that organizations qualify, but still not one where you look at it and say, no, I'm not interested, it's too much to go through. So we're hoping that the NOFA will be released this first quarter, so by the end of March. And so there's a lot to do by the end, but we really appreciate you all being here and hope that your questions and feedback will continue to help us to put out something that will be, appropriate for this community and the kind of projects that we need. So now it's open for you. We're gonna allow for questions, and we'll have responses. We don't have answers to everything, but we'll have responses. We also have a survey that we all want you to complete. There's a number of the questions that say one option only. I know it's hard to only give one option for some of the questions, but please, try your best to just choose one option. And again, it will just help us get a sense of some of the interest from the community and stakeholders.
Great. And before we start with questions, I just want to acknowledge a couple of our commissioners from the Citizen Homelessness Commission that has joined us since we did introductions. I'd first like to acknowledge Mr. Ken Webb, who is the chair. I'd also like to acknowledge Ms. Tanya Reagan, who is the vice chair. And then I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Sam Merton, who is a commissioner. Thank you guys for joining us this evening. I'm going to be passing out the survey, and then I'd be happy to take any questions that you guys may have. Mr. Checkarelli.
How you doing? How's everybody doing? Yeah, first about the bond money. It's being in the bureaucracy right now. That Johnson Road says nobody can use it. Everyone wants to get a little bit of the bond. So right now it's stuck on stupid. And I'd like to hear a comment about that. Also about the transitional housing. The HUD money covers permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. The bond money should cover for transitional housing because ages 25 to 55 is not covered under HUD. So what I'm trying to say to you is that's a big number of people that's missing out. And I'm just saying to you, sir, is you put a building up, the people, the best of the best will go there, by the caseworkers, they'll be like probation or parole people, and that way these people, for the 30 years, will have some type of housing before they die, okay? So I've been saying this for so many times. I wish somebody would comment on it. We need communication when I'm talking so that I can figure out what you're thinking about. Also, bus passes. Bus passes, the second problem with the homeless stay that they're doing. Now, people need to speak up about this. If you're going to put people in these apartments and rapid rehousing, you don't have bus passes, you're wasting time. One more thing. You're going to put these people in apartments, make sure they're not drug addicts or alcoholics, because these people can be put in pretty bad areas. I mean that. And what else going on? One more thing. Let's see here. Oh, Mark Clayton, he left. Okay? That's a big debt. He was the heart and soul of the city council with homelessness. I put a dent where he gave up because he was frustrated. And one more thing, Carol Mendelson. She left because she was frustrated. I talked to her for half an hour. She ran for city council because she feels like when she was on the homeless commission, she couldn't make any difference. And those 40 people were on the first homeless commission. Mogo, I don't care if mention it. Mogo walked out of a meeting because he was frustrated. There's nothing going on. What he saw when he was invited by the partnership, Judge Dominique Collins, another lady, she was frustrated. All of them were frustrated, big time, all of them, with the homeless commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do you have a response before the city weighs in?
Sure. Well, Mr. Chicarelli, appreciate it. You're always coming to these meetings and always listening, giving us good feedback and even your opinion, and certainly it matters. Once the RFP is released, the city doesn't control or have control, so to speak, of who's going to reply. Once those applications come in and you look at the cadence and you look at the groups that are applying, that's how those funds will be distributed, I guess, if that's what you're asking. So until the release happens, until people apply to that, until they come to the city and come and say, this is what we want to use those dollars for, no one will know until that happens. And the recommendation, of course, is based on the fact that you pointed out that a lot of dollars from feds come in for permanent support. And so you're exactly right. And so it's our recommendation, again, we have to wait for the RFPs to come back. Recommendation is to look at rapid rehousing and transitional housing.
But that bottom line should be transitional housing.
Appreciate that feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is what the voters already, voted on, so we can't specify it just for one thing. So it's eligible for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing and transitional. So we have it as eligible uses and priorities, so I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to receive projects that will meet the needs that are your focus, Mr. Chairman.
5 years down the road with the money, and people are going to die and be homeless. That's all I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a little vague on the definitions that you're throwing around, and I'm probably the only guy in the room that doesn't understand perfectly the differences or distinctions between rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and transitional housing. Could you define those for us?
Sure, Ms. Sharp.
So I won't go into too much detail, but given up, that you'll be able to distinguish population. So permanent supportive housing is everyone fine. It's permanent housing that has supportive services attached to it. Those who benefit from permanent supportive housing are what we call chronically homeless. And persons who are chronically homeless are individuals who have been homeless for an extended period of time and also that they have a condition with physical or mental health. So that's permanent supportive housing. The rapid rehousing is the one that identifies that you are rapidly rehousing an individual or a family that can become self-sufficient and at some point be able to maintain their value on their own with appropriate supportive services. So supportive services are also attached to rapid rehousing, but but again, because of that individual or that family, they're not going to make it permanent as those that we would and I'll also mention that those that are chronically homeless, when they have the appropriate wraparound services, some of them also can be used for temporary housing. They don't all need permanent supportive housing. Transitional housing is going to be that housing that could be for those that qualify for permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing. But usually it's a time-limited program with wraparound services as well that is helping individuals implement their housing plan. And so that housing plan is very specific and may include, any budgeting or attaining an income to do the job. There are a variety of type of components of a housing plan that's individualized. And so depending on the shelter or the service provider, they may have different requirements on being a part of the transitional housing program, but it's not intent to be permanent. I hope that was clear.
It helps very much. Then what is the feature of those definitions that drives you towards prioritizing rapid rehousing and transitional, presumably at the expense of permanent supportive housing?
So as Commissioner Kulak mentioned, the Citizen Homelessness Commission, at the subcommittee level and then through the full commission, really looked at how do we make sure these resources leverage what already exists through federal funds. And so most of our funding that comes from HUD through the continuum of care dollars focuses on permanent supportive housing, which is for the chronically homeless, which by default, that means a lot of the other individuals who do not meet the definition of chronically homeless, that population is growing because they can't qualify for permanent supportive housing. So our goal is to make sure that we're leveraging the dollars and being able to address some of those other vulnerable populations that are becoming chronically homeless, right? Because they're having to wait until they move up on the housing priority list.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Tammy Greenberg. I live in the Cedars. So I know you know Linda Garner and stuff, but we are surrounded with shelters and day shelters, and we do have supporting a public, the Bellevue Apartments. And I got a big issue about, I know we need the housing for everybody, but I feel like some Bellevue Apartments are not being you really need a better apartment management. You really need to do your research on what you're doing, because me and this tenant who lives there, we went on Sunday to clean up the Bellevue apartment. They put the trash next to the cars and everything. And we try to be good neighbors, but I feel like some of the services are not being good neighbors to the Cedars. And you really need to listen to the neighborhood association. I know you're getting a lot of feedback, but it's a big thing. And I know we need more housing, but please think about the Cedars. Downtown Cedars, we have enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think certainly a big part of this, as this RFP goes out, will be that public community feedback. So when those groups apply for the funding and go through that process, community feedback is a part of it. So, today's presentation is about the bond election that the citizens passed in 2017, and what are we going to do with those dollars, and how do we get that RFP out there, and then how do groups reply. So that public comment piece is certainly going to be part of that process. And so I would say, keep coming to these or be part of those conversations. If a developer, if somebody comes along and says, I have another project and I want to put it in, whether it's the Cedars or any neighborhood in the city, that sort of community engagement piece is going to be an important part of that.
Thank you for that response, Commissioner. And I'll also mention that as part of the RFP, whoever is submitting the proposal, they'll have to show their community support and community engagement plan. So so not a project that they've already been in process of engaging with, what is their plan specifically to get the word out to the neighborhood, to receive their feedback, and how they'll incorporate that into their final proposal. Yes, sir.
I was wondering if there's going to be any possibility to relax the residential parking standards when you build these, because I know that the city has these parking requirements, that require, 1.5 parking spaces for every single unit. And I know that you're presenting as your goals to have housing that would be closer to mixed use and closer to public transportation. And when you're doing that, naturally this land is more valuable and it's more costly, and that runs up the cost of your projects. So these parking requirements seem too onerous anyway. I mean, even for infill development, in our city. And I was wondering if anyone is reviewing this to try to dial them back somewhat, since these homeless families are not all going to be, two cars per family and whatnot. Although the parking regulations seem to assume that they are. I mean, we're not even 2 cars for our family. We got one car that we use once or twice a month. So I really think as far as a comment that this should be looked at, dialing back these parking restrictions on these buildings to make it more affordable, so that they can build affordable housing so people can live in them.
Thank you for that comment. We're actually in the process of working with our other city departments on that specifically, just looking at a broad, holistic approach to be able to accomplish our goals and needs, if there will be some potential amendments. I don't have anything to report at this point in time, but that is something that's very valuable. It's a valid point, and that's something that we're looking into. All right, I'm going to hit this way, and I'm going to make my way over.
I just had a question about, so the most recent NOFA process for city funding that went through, to me, in my opinion, it felt like it put a objective lens on something that was completely subjective. There was no appeal process. There was no way to kind of dispute anything you felt the city got wrong in their kind of the way they interpreted your application. And kind of in the community that submits these proposals, it was very obvious that, I mean, no offense to Mr. Diekman next to me, but he has a lot more experience than I do, yet I got more experience points than he did in the previous NOFA. So is that going to be addressed going forward with these NOFAs and RFAs that we're putting out, to where if you feel that it was completely incorrect in the way that the application was scored, is there going to be a process to address that?
So I'll take that question. We've actually been able to learn a lot from housing and neighborhood revitalization's NOFA process, and that's really the beauty of us going a couple months after theirs, because we can learn and just be able to improve upon their process. Work closely with their director, and they had some new staff. They're kind of going through some changes, so we're well aware of the concerns regarding appeals, and we're actually building into our process some time to address situations that you mentioned, where there's really more time to kind of have that feedback before things are finalized.
If I could make one comment. It's also important, though, that in your responses, because we can only evaluate what's in the actual proposal, that it clearly responds to those questions and provide that information.
And I think that's why the appeal process is necessary, because I don't think there's any question that in the couple of applications that I'm speaking about, that it wasn't clear as day. But the city said it wasn't, and when we have no appeal process, they say, well, let's look at this because we think you may have missed what we put there. So I appreciate that response, but I just don't think it really addresses the core problem.
Yeah, right. I don't know what your specific situation is, but that's just something to remember, that like being very clear in a response so that there isn't misinterpretation, but yes, like with your specific situation, it may not be, it may not be. the
And I
same.
don't think it's just my specific situation. I think it's pretty across the board. I mean, and I understand your response, but I just feel like that's kind of trying to place the blame back on the proposers when we're the ones trying to build these houses. We're trying to meet these needs, and kind of the problems being put in front of us are just new hurdles that we can't afford to handle.
I'm gonna jump over to show this side of some love, and then I'll come back over. Ms. Chabot?
2 questions. What are you considering young adults?
So we have looked at, we talked about 2 different age groups. We know 18 to 24 falls into that category. We have discussed an age range, from that 13 to 17 when you talk about the unaccompanied youth. But we'll still have to kind of spell that out because there, are challenges to serving minors. And we also know that After Aid to Educate has also just developed a facility. But typically the young adult age is the 18 to 24.
Okay. And then what are we considering the city's reinvestment strategy areas?
So those strategy areas are specifically named in the housing policy, and we can get those, but it includes areas like Redbird and Wynwood and I shouldn't have started naming too.
That's
I don't know
fine.
the rest, but we can get those.
So we are seeing an increase in individuals who are needing rapid rehousing. So I would strongly encourage that we extend past the subpopulations that you've listed to include individuals as well. Because there are several individuals who could benefit from rapid rehousing, like you said, instead of waiting for them to become chronic. So I would encourage you to consider that as well.
Thank you. Let me get them, and I'll come on back.
Did
you have something?
I also have 2 questions. My first question is, are you anticipating the respondents to the RDI to be developers who are going to be both constructing the units and then operating them afterwards, or are you going to turn them over to the city for management? The concern being that if you have one developer who's both constructing and doing the maintenance and service provision, they might not have perfect expertise in both areas. So I think that's something to look at if it's not turned over to the city. And then the second question is, are you going to ensure that every time a project is developed and completed, the city is going to have a corresponding increase to the operations budget to make sure that the property is going to be maintained and the services provided effectively?
You'll take it.
Would you like me to start?
Director, go for it, please.
All right, regarding operating support, that is obviously something that we would want because we know that it's necessary, but that is something that would have to be approved through our city council. And I would just like to acknowledge Councilmember Felder, who just walked in. So I think you might have heard the request of city council to make sure that we have some operating support for any of our housing units that are built with the $20 million bond. I wanted to make sure you heard that, sir. He said he didn't hear. Thank you for coming. So that was one of your questions, and the other one was just related to experience in terms of the property management, or if the city were going.
Who's going to take over, who's going to be doing the maintenance and operating, and if it's going to be a developer, if it needs to be the city, someone they can go and instruct those properties.
Yeah, so his point was really the development team may be really good at constructing the units, but they may not have the expertise to manage the property or do that supportive case management. And that is something that we will really spell out in the NOFA, because we're really looking for collaboration and partnerships where that has to be included. That's not a either or. Like, we have to have sound construction management, property management, and the case management for the supportive services. So we'll be looking for the proposals and the applications to show the team and who would do each piece. The city will not be maintaining any of these properties. Did we get all of your questions?
It's those two, I may ask them more.
Okay, wonderful. Ms. Reagan? Oh, you may have it. Heather, did you have a hand up? Oh. Trying to make sure I show this side some love. Let me get this gentleman back here who's doing a wonderful job recording.
My one question is, as in foster homes, you talk about unaccompanied teenagers and whatnot, with the reference of not having enough experience to keep an apartment or house. How about creating some type of counseling type system to help them be able to cope with this large investment like that?
I didn't mention that there wasn't enough experience, but there are just challenges that have to be addressed whenever you're housing unaccompanied youth. So we would have to look at, if we receive proposals for that specific component, then we would have to be very intentional on evaluating it to make sure that all liabilities are addressed and that the appropriate services are attached.
All right. I'm going to get everyone who hasn't asked a question, and then we'll come back for round two.
Thank you.
Sir?
Thank you. John Green in City Square Housing. I've got, I guess, a few fairly direct things, I think. First, the timing of the release of this NOFA. I'm sure you're aware that the largest possible source of leverage is competitive 9% tax credits. Mm-hmm. And the NOFA is going to be released too late for this year. So that already puts some severe limits on what's going to be possible in leverage. The second is, I wonder if you could be a little less coy about what the city expects in the way of leverage. How much per unit does the city expect to put into projects? If we're going to craft a proposal that meets the city's expectations, I think we need something less vague on that idea. And I'll just finally, the last thing is, the reason there's no federal dollars that go for transitional housing any longer is that the studies show that it's less effective than permanent supportive housing. So I wonder how you came to the conclusion to go forward with that when it's not regarded as a best practice anymore.
So it's rapid rehousing and transitional housing?
Rapid rehousing is, but not transitional.
Right. So the recommendation was for rapid rehousing and transitional housing. We do recognize that HUD doesn't promote transitional housing because it doesn't align with housing first. However, we also recognize that having a housing-focused perspective with a number of organizations who do not receive federal funds, that those programs can have some positive outcomes. So with that, we're open to receiving proposals. We would look at the proposals and align the evaluation would align those with best practices and make sure that it's appropriate for the population that they're proposing to serve. But we didn't want to throw it out as an option.
What about the amount of money that the city wants to leverage?
I can respond to that. We'll have a little bit more detail in the RFP, but what you will not see is a specific number of, let's say, the city will only fund up to $30,000 per unit. You won't see that. In my experience working with developers, whenever we give that amount, every single proposal you receive has the maximum amount. When you evaluate the performer and you do your own analysis, every single proposal you get, if you say the max per unit is $30,000, that's what you receive. So you won't see that, but we'll have more detail for you, just to give you some ideas of, if the leverage, so say it's a $20 million project and the leverage is, 50%, this is the award points you would get versus if you're only, leveraging 5%. So you have an idea in terms of the scale, but you won't see a specific max investment on the city's end. Mr. Carl.
Hey, how y'all doing? A couple of questions, hopefully I'll remember all of them. Number one is I would recommend that you definitely get with the zoning and permitting department, as was mentioned before, like with parking regulations, and also with leverage against $20 million. $20 million is not that much. I think I just read recently that Denver renewed their housing trust fund for their city, and they put $300 million annually into building affordable housing, and that's really something that's a little more realistic. And so if we're not going to put more money into it, then a really good way to leverage it is to do things through zoning and permitting, like obviously waiving some of the restrictions for parking, or some of the density issues, or some of the impact fees that go along with the development. In my experience, most developers will tell you, and again, not quite this simply, but money is only one part of the equation. It's really all the other costs that go along with it. There is money out there, like the low-income housing tax credits and things like that, but when it comes down to permitting and having to change use, the use of the land, or like I said, impact fees or taxes or things that go along with it, that's what really often kills a project. And so that could be a good way for the city to leverage the $20 million and make it more than just $20 million that we're actually putting in as an investment. The second thing, when it comes down to percentages of the transitional versus the rapid rehousing versus the permanent supportive housing, I don't know if y'all ran actual numbers on it or did like a strategic analysis or a system analysis of exactly how much of each of those types of units are in our system. But it is one thing that I'm working on currently, and if we were able to come up with something, or not even me, but somebody was able to come up with something that was strategic and could show you exactly how many units in each of the categories was needed, would the city consider, as part of this RFP, then putting percentages on how much of that type of housing that you would actually put out for the $20 million bond. So again, if somebody came back with a strategic analysis and said, look, you know, we really have enough permanent supportive housing, let's say, so really, can you just limit that and just say 10% of the 20 million should go to permanent supportive housing, whereas the other types of housing, transitional, rapid rehousing, whatever other types, you know, we might be able to show strategically from a system standpoint exactly what the percentages are that are needed in the community. And then finally, the third thing is, and I haven't really formulated my question in my head yet, but I noticed that on the survey, one of the ways that you're looking at possibly using this is through mixed income housing. And so I'm wondering how that might work in terms of the $20 million bond. If you have a mixed income housing, you know, complex, let's say it's 100 units or something like this, and only 20 of them are going to be affordable units. Are you saying that you would only allow the bond money to be used for those 20 units, or could it still be used for the entire project, realizing that then that makes it a sustainable project going forward? Because if you have 80, you know, market rate units and 20 affordable housing units, then you never have to worry about losing those affordable units ever, because the 80 will sustain it at that point. So I don't know if you've looked at that or how it would be in.
So I'll answer the last question first.
Okay.
So as it relates to a mixed income project, 100% of the 20 million has to be for units that are dedicated for the homeless. Not necessarily fixed units. However, whatever dollars are spent have to be for those particular units. And so in that case, it would of course be leveraging a project, but it's kind of like if you're familiar with the home investment partnership funds, that there are a specific number of units that's tied to the dollar amount, and we would be monitoring compliance for those particular units, but also against whatever the entire proposal was as it relates to the other units of the project.
Well, I would, again, then that'll prompt my comment, which again, I'm not a developer, so, and it's probably not totally formulated in my head yet, but I would recommend that you might reconsider that a little bit. If the developer could show that those 20 units would be developed at a lower rate than they might be able to be developed if it was, say, just a 20-unit complex where all of the money had to be used for that instead. So that might just be something.
We definitely can check with our bond counsel, because it's really based on the bond covenant that would restrict.
Right. And so that might be something that it might be a little flexible with, because that might allow you to have a unit that will continue and keep operating costs, things like that.
And then just one comment on your, I guess your second point about the strategy piece.
Yes.
I mean, certainly, I would think that we'd all be interested in understanding the numbers and the cadence of what numbers of housing on each of those three areas. I mean, certainly that type of information only allows us to make even better decisions.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and Monica will probably add to this, we would definitely want to include it from this is where our needs are. I don't know that we would use it to put caps, just because we don't know what type of proposals we're going to receive. And so, because we know that there's gonna be enough need on the housing priority list for whatever type of proposal is submitted. And so, if for some reason all we received was proposals for permanent supportive housing, that probably would develop, we probably still would have the need, right?
Sure.
And so, from that standpoint, I don't think that we would cap it, but we definitely would include it so that respondents would have a sense of where the need is.
And the comment that I was going to make is, once we were able to receive that data from the needs assessment perspective, we could use that to inform how we would score the proposals. So if we saw that the need was for, let's say, rapid rehousing instead of permanent supportive housing, when we looked at the scoring and the evaluation, we could score rapid rehousing higher than permanent supportive housing. And then that would kind of get to the need. But to Charlette's point, we would not most likely want to actually put a limit, because the one time you put a limit, that's when you actually get all proposals that are something else, and they'd be great proposals, but we wouldn't be able to fund them. And then we'd have to go back out and do another RFP, and then that would be 6 more months before we'd be able to see something. So we do like to keep as much flexibility as possible. Bless you. Do we have any more on this side before we do round 2? All right, you already had anybody else before we start back with round 2? Yes, sir, how are you?
Good, how you doing? So what about when it comes to like, I guess like single parent, like women, is there gonna be like a complex or like a housing for just, like women who like have kids or don't have much support as far as, you know what I'm saying? Like,
No, those type of projects are definitely encouraged, and so families with children is an allowable target population, and it would be up to the developer or other entity to describe what that complex would look like and include a program design, but that would be an allowable project.
okay, what about people that are, I guess, on like, I guess drugs, whatever, and then seeking like rehab? Is there a possibility that it'll be like housing for, I guess,
And also, and again, you send the RFP out, these groups will reply back. Certainly, you're going to have a combination of maybe, obviously, people that have substance abuse issues, and as long as the proposals come back, and we're going to have the supportive services there. Sure.
Okay, cool, thank you.
All right, Mr. Ceccarelli.
Okay. What's his name?
Which one, Mr. Carl?
Mr. Carl. Okay, the article I gave you, sir, you need to focus on that right now, okay? Because people are not talking about it, right? And so if you focus on that, you will solve 80% of the problem first, right now, because it's a tragedy what's going on. You read an article very carefully and do something, meet with Monica, meet with Felder, and see why there's the tragedy, what happened with the so-called genocide. Okay? You do that first, you're on your way. Because I'm very serious about that. I would die. I go to jail on purpose to avoid the streets, sir. CBS 11 News did an article, did a thing about me. So you want to do something worthwhile, you do that right away. Because it's terrible what's going on. Siobhan, you talked about the people above 24 years old. Well, they talk about 18 and 24 because that comes from HUD, what they're talking about, like Job Corps. So they're doing it because they're dictated by HUD with the money. What you're talking about, they can't do it with HUD money, but they can do it with the bond money. Okay? I would definitely support what you're talking about, but it has to do with bond money because we've got 25 to 62 they're not talking about. Okay? So that's what the bond money could be used for, maybe 100% of it. You use the HUD money, like I said, for permanent supportive housing, but leave permanent supportive housing alone. That's 5 years down the road. How many times do I have to say homelessness is a 24-hour problem? Every second. You never talk about it. How many times do I have to say it? Really, you know, people without, sir, what I'm talking about. All right, they don't listen. Also, the bond money. You know what percentage of that came out of the $1 billion, sir? 2%. And how homeless problem is the number one problem here in Dallas, and the city council voted only 2%. So that's what you're up against, about the city council and the support that you're going to face. But if you do that right now, show that article to everybody, and meet with them, talk about it in front of city council, county commissioners, you'll win over them, especially county commissioners. You got 3 of those Democrats, Jenkins, John Wiley Price, and Garcia, they don't care. But if you show that article, maybe it'll help. But you need some kind of status so that way you can break this cycle. What made me mad was Cindy Crane. She had the right idea, taking those people out of shelters and put them in Tent City because they weren't getting any housing. They weren't. She was frustrated. Mark Clayton was frustrated. That's why he quit. Carol Mendelson quit from the Homeless Commission because there's nothing was getting done. Please do it, sir. That article, and focus on everything right there for the first 4 months. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, back on this side.
I have 2 simple questions regarding the structure of the RFP. One is, will site control be required to enter? And the second is, do you anticipate, as the housing department apparently is going to do with their single-family NOFA, a 2-stage submission where you put the broad strokes up for scoring, you learn that you're competitive before you spend the 20 grand to make the definitive proposal?
Great response. Do you want to start, Ms. Sharp, or do you want me to jump in?
So for the first question, as it relates to site control, we will receive proposals that are what we consider shovel ready, as well as projects where you may need a little bit more, your financing or to get site control. We do prefer, we'll prioritize those shovel ready projects just because it will help, expedite addressing our annual production goals. As it relates to the second question, we don't anticipate phasing this out. We'll have one NOFA receive proposals, and then if there's a balance of those dollars, then we will be able to put it out again because we didn't have projects for the full amount. Am I correct?
That is correct, but we will be partnering with the housing department. So they have more funding than what we have available. So right now, we just have the $20 million bond, but they have, CDBG funding, they have home funding, and we're hopeful that we'll have another bond allocation coming up. So we've been meeting, just talking about the housing policy and just overall goals. And we know that the housing policy really kind of missed the mark serving the homeless because they focus on 30 to 120, and we're pretty much 0 to 30% with some exceptions. So been discussing it with the director, David, and we've been talking about whether we start with pilot programs where our offices are working together, or whether we wait for a large inflection of funds. But we will be doing some joint NOFAs in the future, and specific to the single family question. And I don't think we talked about it too much yet, but in our notice of funding availability, we'll actually have a request for developer interest and qualifications. So we'll basically be qualifying you at the same time. So let's say there's opportunity where you had a contract to purchase on a site, but you haven't pulled the trigger to actually purchase it because you're not going to pull the trigger unless you were to actually be awarded and receive funding. We'd be able to still review your proposal, look at your qualifications, as a developer, as a development team, what you guys bring to the table without you having to go out and purchase a property. Did that answer your question? Or did you have a part 2?
It answered the question. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sir?
Oh, just a few random ideas, I guess. As far as the age restriction, if what the gentleman said is true, that it's HUD that dictates it, I can see why that would be an issue. But as far as categorizing young people, probably better to say something like 18 to 29 rather than 18 to 24 or something. It seems to take kids a lot longer to grow up nowadays, especially if there's a baby involved and they're trying to get independent of the parents and move out and, and to get to community college and job training, and also youth housing might look up to age 30 rather than 25. Also, it might be time for the city to put in some sort of a anti-discrimination ordinance against Section 8 that would have teeth. I don't know what that would look like, because I know that most landlords screen on the basis of credit, and so if they're screening on the basis of credit, I don't know how you could have how that would work exactly, but it's something the city should look at. And kind of echo something that my wife was saying earlier, I think there should be definite city standards in place for the cleanliness of properties, because like the one that we have in our area, it's an attractive building. The colors are kind of wonky, but they can fix that the next time they paint. The sidewalks are nice. It's landscaped nice. There's grass. It's nice, and trees. But the one failure is the litter aspect, and that's what erodes public support for having supportive housing and low-cost affordable housing in the neighborhood, when they see that there's a litter problem. And so it might be an issue that when they award these contracts, to have some sort of an ongoing thing where, have cameras, and if a tenant litters, give them a warning, and the next time they litter, put their stuff out on the sidewalk. I know it sounds draconian, but it would only have to happen once, and everybody would get the message, and there wouldn't be any more litter. So anyway, it's just some random thoughts.
Thank you for that feedback. Ms. Sharp, I don't know if you want to, or Commissioner Kulak, if you want to talk any about the site selection criteria that will be utilized in the NOFA.
So as part of the site selection criteria, it really looks at a number of components. So development location, having property management on site, having crime prevention group, and then looking at, of course, amenities that are in certain proximity. And so those are very important to us. And of course, there will be a compliance period for any project that we fund. And as a part of that compliance period, we'll be looking at the condition of properties, looking at tenant complaints, just to really be able to look holistically, not only at meeting housing quality standards, but the experience of those that are being served, and if they are having appropriate property management for the property at large.
So we are now at 7:30, so we have about 5 more minutes for questions. Yes, sir.
Okay, 2 more questions. Since we're talking about compliance, I'm interested in how exactly the city is going to be measuring the compliance of the operators of these properties, and also if, for example, the city isn't able to get the operator to meet all the requirements, is the city going to have a process to turn it over to somebody else who would actually do a better job? And the second question is, since we're trying to get this done quickly and there's all the talk of leverage, does the city already have some available properties that could be converted that would possibly save some money or get it done faster, since there's already some infrastructure in place?
So I'll start on that. So the first question just kind of related to, let's say we award some money to a developer and they just don't do a good job. Really, what?
How are you going to ensure that?
Right. So really, what's the compliance? So what's the evaluation of their property management? How are they doing? And if they're not doing well, really, what's kind of the next steps on that? So. We've been talking internally about really how to accomplish that. So it would not be the Office of Homeless Solutions that would be going out and doing the monitoring. Most likely we would partner with city departments who already kind of have that function. So for example, code compliance, they monitor rental properties. So we're already working with them on a couple task forces, really looking at some data that they have now and looking at trends as to what really shows a property is not really performing well, so that we can build that into when we're evaluating the projects, because our goal would be to not be in that position in the first place. If it is a poor performing property, they're not doing well, then we would go through, the process with our community prosecution office to do the legal process with that, and whether it goes into receivership and be able to get it into better hands. But the number one goal would be to put the process in place so that we wouldn't get to that point.
But would you guys coordinate all the departments who are reviewing the different ordinances and making sure?
Correct, yes.
Otherwise, you're kind of worried that maybe one department is work, or they identify problems and not share it, so overall, nobody's really knowing what's going on in the process, trying to get silos.
Correct. And that's one of the things that we've already started that work on now. For example, code compliance, they're really trying to do better with, especially with their single family developments, and when they're not owned, it's somebody else that lives in California or New York and all of that. So they've kind of recently pulled us in. So we've been working with them on what we've already created with our site selection criteria, and looking at how we can help them and what they're doing, and really kind of have that cross-pollination among departments who are not working in silos, and that we can really learn from each other and say, okay, this is what these two departments are doing. Who else do we need to bring to the table, so that we can assure that we really have a sound process that makes sense? Great question. And then your second question related to, does the city own any property that would be able to be up? And we are in the process of actually reviewing the properties. We don't have a lot of actual buildings that we could be able to utilize, but we do have some vacant land. And we'll have to go through the process with City Council to determine which sites we actually want to make available for the creation of housing units on them. Once we've done that, then we'll actually include them in the NOFA. And what we would basically say is it would be the city's contribution to the development. So it would save the developer on, the acquisition cost. That would be our contribution. And then they would submit proposals for what they would build on that site. Great question. Yes, sir. And then I'll come back to you, Ms. Reagan.
Just one question. Will the neighborhoods be notified of the developments that are going to go in before it's all sealed, signed, and delivered?
Absolutely. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for community engagement. So just throughout, these processes that we're doing now, once we actually look, so once the city, before we actually release any city-owned sites, we'll have to go through that community process. For some of the sites, there will have to be some zoning involved. So again, you have all those processes where you have community input on that. And then before we were to award any of the proposals, they would go through City Council, and there's an opportunity for community feedback at that. But really for us, we don't want it to be reactive in the sense of the community finds out about it when the city's getting ready to go to City Council to get approval. We're actually going to be asking the development community to show us what their plan is to engage the community, and really have them follow through on that, because we want to be as proactive. It's not fair to the community where they find out in the 9th hour. We really want the developer to come in at the beginning and say, hey, we're really interested, it aligns with our mission, we want to be able to build this quality housing, this is who we are, this is our expertise, this is our experience, this is how we'll do property management, this is how we'll handle specific things, and be meeting with the community to get their feedback up front before they really go through that process. Great question. I see my council member Felder has a question back here. Let me make sure I get him in the Ms. Reagan. I'll be right back to you.
So several months ago, I met with your department, and we were talking about churches being able to house homeless. And the legal department was supposed to be looking at that, as well as some other departments. So I'd just like to know where we are in that process, where the faith-based community could be engaged and possibly house homeless.
Thank you for that question. So we are actually in the process of working through that. We will be doing a presentation to Human and Social Needs on March the 18th, and then we'll be before City Council on April the 17th, giving an update on inclement weather and how churches, faith-based organizations can really participate. We've actually been partnering with a lot of them. I'm not sure if you're aware, we actually have a small new division within my office that's focusing on strategic partners. So it's a small staff, it's only 2 right now, but maybe we'll get some more in the budget. But really actually working, going out, meeting with partners, faith-based organizations to see how they would like to partner with us and aligning solutions for the homeless. So we'll have more to report to that as we come. Let me get Commissioner Reagan and then this young lady who's behind her, and then we'll have to be wrapping it up here shortly.
I was just piggybacking on his question earlier. Are any of the properties that are being evaluated, are they part of the land bank? Because we have so many properties that are wrapped up, and to incentivize developers to build on them instead of saying, well, you can take one here, or you can take one here, packaging those, because a lot of them are contiguous, and there are areas where there are several. So taking away those limitations where you say to someone who's willing to come in and build, we will package 25 or 30 instead of keeping those on the city roll. I mean, it seems like that would be a great incentive. Are land bank properties part of that analysis?
Yes, they are.
Thank you. So my question is, a lot of times the homeless tend to have other issues, whether they're struggling with drug addiction or mental illness. Both is very common. So is that included? Is that part of the, when you're looking at, programs that are successful, are you thinking of that component when you're looking at this housing? Because housing alone without those components, I struggle with what the implications are for the neighborhoods, because the neighborhoods will not be happy with that.
So I'll start, and then I'll see if any of the presenters have any additional feedback. So that is absolutely required. So with any of this bond funding, so the developer will have to discuss what supportive services they'll bring to the table with the development. So it's not, if you were to think of just a regular affordable housing development, it has to have supportive services connected to it.
So it's a requirement.
Correct, it is a requirement, yes ma'am. And depending on the proposal though, it'll depend on what they offer. So, if they're targeting, a senior development, they may not need substance abuse. It just depends on what they're focusing on, but whatever their target population is, they'll need supportive services for that specific population. Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have any last questions before we need to wrap up here? All right, well, again, we hope that this is not the last time that I see, sir, you have one last question?
I'm not sure if funny, but when's the next meeting? Or is it this year? I'm not being funny.
So this is the last meeting that we have specifically before releasing the bond on these funds. The Citizen Homeless Commission, they actually meet next Thursday on the 14th at 3 o'clock, and I can give you more information if you would like to attend that meeting.
Thank you. So again, put in a plug for our Citizen Homelessness Commission. We always welcome the opportunity to have anyone come at any time to provide feedback. And now's a really good time, as Commissioner Kulak will be finalizing some of the recommendations as we get ready to really wrap up the NOFA planning and get ready to release it. You have our contact information. We'll stick around for a couple minutes if you have any additional questions that you didn't have an opportunity to ask. But again, we appreciate your feedback, and we look forward to having these continued conversations in the future. Thank you for coming.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.